Good evening, Mr. Rogoff,
Hello.
and thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Of course.
I will resist the temptation to start with a question about Donald Trump, although I will not be able to avoid it later. We have been hearing from economists during the last few years that despite the de-escalation of inflation, prices will not return to pre-pandemic levels. We also hear that wages should not follow the rate of price increases, as this could lead to an inflationary spiral with particularly negative consequences for the economy. Ultimately, how will Western consumers regain their lost purchasing power?
Well, first of all, the way you worded your question was the price won't return to its previous level. The central banks aren't really trying to do that. They're trying to bring the rate of increase of prices down. And that's been one of the political problems because the average person, me as a consumer, sees the prices so high. And then everybody says, oh, don't worry, the inflation's over and you're looking for it to come down.
Exactly.
But it doesn't. And it's not going to. That they're not trying to. I think they have increased the money supply, increased demand to leave the prices up there. Some economists may say it's not good for wages to go up. I wouldn't say that. I mean, in a good, healthy economy, you would like wages to go up faster than prices. You want people to be feeling wealthier. And actually, in the United States, they are. I think Europe's in a very different position. Of course, what central banks worry about is that the wages start getting way ahead of where the productivity is. But ideally, that wouldn't be happening. So I don't think rising wages is a problem.
So it's not a bad idea. Yeah.
No, it's not a problem. It's good. I mean, it's another thing when a union asks for 40% raise when inflation is 3%, that's something different.
The tariffs with which President Trump is threatening are in a position to exert new upward pressure on prices. Do you think that his economic agenda, more broadly, will put the brakes on Fed's interest rate cut?
Starting with your last question, no. And not because of the tariffs, because it's an overheated economy. The U.S. is doing well, but it's overheated. I think the U.S. is going to look like this under Donald Trump, that there's inflation and a recession coming in the second half.
That was the GDP?
Upward growth is going to be going up, and then it's going to be going down. Prices are going to be going like that. I mean, it depends on
Not so optimistic.
It depends on what the central bank does. And they can raise interest rates more and more and more and contain inflation. But Donald Trump says, I want high growth, low inflation, high employment, and these things aren't necessarily consistent. The tariffs, the inflation, a lot of economists are talking about that. I don't care about that. It's tiny in the scheme of things. I don't want to say it doesn't matter. You talk about 1% of extra inflation, but it's just one time. So unless he's going to go like this with the tariffs, who knows? I don't know what he plans to do. The problem with the tariffs is just something completely different, which is that it's a real break with the global order. It's chaotic. No one knows what he's doing. I actually think the tariffs are more likely to lead to interest rate cuts than hikes, if that was the only thing going on. Why? Because it creates a lot of uncertainty. It creates nervousness with investment consumers. In 2018, he did a small-scale version of what he's proposing to do now. And the Fed had just started raising interest rates from zero. And when he started doing that, the economy started weakening, and they had to cut interest rates. But I think on the whole, if we look at the total Donald Trump package of economic policies, then we're looking at interest rates not going down on average. I think the odds this year are that at the end of the year, the interest rate the Fed sets is likely to be higher as it is to be lower.
On the other hand, are there any elements in Trump's economic program that would work?
There are a lot of good things in Trump's economic program, and I say this despite being a Harvard professor, where a lot of people have what we call Trump derangement syndrome and say everything he does is wrong. And what I say to them is, if I gave you your students a multiple choice test, they had to pick among 5 answers on each question, and they got every one wrong. They must have known the answers. You can't get everything wrong all the time. And he has good instincts on some things. I think Biden had hugely expanded the regulatory state. His open borders policy for immigration was just nuts. Not politically smart, not economically smart, not anything. He did all kinds of stimulus that were just a waste on top of an overheated economy. We weren't in recession, we were in a boom. So, some of Trump's instincts are good. On the other hand, if you look at his policy promises that he did during the election, most of it were taking Trump 1, where he was before, and putting something nonsensical on top of it. So let's not tax pension benefits, government pension benefits we call Social Security. Let's not tax tips. Let's not tax this and that. Well, that wins you votes, but it's not a way to manage things. I don't know what he'll actually do. And I must say, I bet if you could be inside his brain right now, and you might not survive long inside there, I don't think he knows what he intends to do. So for me to sit and say, his policies will do this and this, who knows? I mean, it's anybody's guess.
An argument used by the US president in the recently held World Economic Forum is that his energy policy will lead to an increase in supply, which will lower energy prices and therefore reduce inflation. Is this valid? And if so, is it enough?
Well, that was absolutely the boldest thing that he said at the World Economic Forum. And I listened to his speech, and I say that as someone who doesn't listen to presidential speeches, but social pressures forced me to go listen to that one. We're in this world where it seems that AI is going to be an energy glutton, just eating, by many measures, half the energy in just a few years. So Trump said, I'm going to double the energy. I don't know how, but how is he going to do it that quickly? I mean, I think nuclear, but you can't build that fast. I don't know what he plans to do.
3 million barrels per day.
Yeah, but Biden already was pressuring things up. But maybe he plans on Saudi Arabia increasing its output. I really don't know. He makes a lot of claims, but directionally, it's understandable what he's doing. And you haven't asked me about Europe, but that scared the daylights out of the Europeans because energy prices in Europe are here. Everywhere else, they're here. Europe's not competitive. And now he's talking about even more. Now, will it lower prices? I don't know, because AI, if he's deregulating it, and that's his mantra, deregulate everything, it will be consuming a lot of power. So I don't know that this is really a policy about inflation. It's a policy about power.
Another part of the equation is the US fiscal outlook. Do you think that the US debt will become a matter of concern to the markets at some point?
It's a matter of concern to the markets now. I think interest rates would have been high if Trump had lost. I think a lot of that just has to do with the return to normal. Economists, particularly academic economists, central bank economists, and until recently, business economists, have been mesmerized by the super low interest rates. And they said it's forever. They even thought it would go like this. I've never believed that. I've looked at the history. If you look at a long period, this was just a normal low interest rate period. We've had high interest rate periods. I think it's something that's coming to an end. And therefore, debt will seem like it's not a free lunch. I mean, people in Europe understand that very well, but in the United States, they don't. It's going to take a real mental change. So we can pay it, but I think ultimately there may be another burst of inflation, not caused just by debt, but that'll be one of the driving elements.
For those who don't know, apart from being a distinguished economist, you are also a grandmaster in chess. In your opinion, what do you think is the strategy that Europe should follow in its game with Trump? I'm referring, of course, to the threats of tariffs on Europe's products.
Well, the clearest answer to that is when your opponent's doing something wild, you need to stay calm and think clearly and not take panicked actions. And I think it's very important for Europe to sort of hold back, see what the storm is, see what's going on, not try to guess what he's doing. it's not a zero, chess is what we call a zero-sum game. You're either winning or losing. There's some parallel here. So in chess, if your opponent's throwing an attack wildly at you, it often exposes weaknesses in their position.
This means no retaliation?
Well, calm in terms of you can't do no retaliation because your public won't support that. Actually, your audience may not believe this, but the economic answer to someone putting crazy tariffs on is actually to do nothing. India and Brazil have crazy tariffs. How has that worked out for India and Brazil? Not very well. But that's impossible politically. If you face a bully, you punch them in the nose. That's very natural. So I think they have to do something, but I would say to stay calm and not randomly throw things on. And I'm not sure that where this is going. What's his bluster? What does he want? In bargaining with Trump, I think it's very important that to understand in his whole life, he does not keep his word. He changes constantly. It's his tactic. He knows he's not going to keep his word. Look at Canada and Mexico. He's putting 25% tariffs on them. I think that's really happening. He just negotiated the treaty with Trump just over 4 years ago. That was his treaty. And now he's taking the treaty and saying, just kidding, 25% tariffs. So you have to understand this is who you're dealing with. It's his bargaining strategy. He did it in business. And so, he's looking for you to give ground, and then he asks for something more. So again, calm in dealing with him. This is not a straightforward person you're dealing with.
In the meantime, do you believe that Trump can settle the geopolitical fronts? Because if we see peace agreements in Ukraine and the Middle East, we will obviously have a different scenario ahead, extremely beneficial for the global economy. What are your thoughts on the matter?
Well, I'm optimistic that he brings a fresh perspective, that he's less politically trapped. I could take the example of Israel, where Biden, I think, did a lot of good things, but he was really tied in by his party, which is very, very left-wing, very anti-Israel, and maybe to some extent anti-Semitic. And so there were just limits to what he could do. And Trump, comes with fresh perspective. That's as far as the Middle East. It's not easy, but he actually did better in his first term in the Middle East than anyone had done in many, many decades.
Abraham records, etc.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, he didn't get a Nobel Prize for that because he's right-wing and not left-wing, but that was remarkable. In Ukraine, there was this bluster. I'm going to fix it in a day. It's all going to be over. Now he's elected. He said, just kidding. I realize Putin has to agree to what we're doing. And he's obviously talked to Putin. Putin thinks he's winning. Russia can just afford to lose people, lose money, and winning by attrition. So I think Trump's going to have to decide what to do. I think he needs to bring China in on his side. This is Russia, U.S. and China together can pressure Putin, and at some point, China will want to do that. But again, again, there's so many people who hate Trump in the United States, but give him a chance. He has ideas. The existing plan was not working. Ukraine was losing. I don't think Ukraine was winning. They're too small. They're losing by attrition. And so somebody needs to step in to get a peace.
I won't ask you if you've bought Donald Trump's cryptocurrency, but I will ask you how you assess this action by the US president.
So I don't hold any cryptocurrency because I write about it and I speak to central bankers, and I just don't want to have something in the background. I think it was criminal. I really do. And again, I don't have Trump derangement syndrome. I don't think everything he does is illegal. This was really bad. I mean, the signal that this sends, where he's regulating crypto a day later after he becomes president and starting a cryptocurrency, it's all boomed because he said he's going to deregulate it. If you said you're going to deregulate Goldman Sachs or Citibank or JP Morgan and just said, okay, we put on all these regulations after the financial crisis, just kidding, we're going to take them off, they would boom too. And so, yeah, it was really, he does these things which are just mind-boggling sometimes. Again, he has some good ideas. He brings some good things to the table, but then he does these things which are just incomprehensible. By the way, central bankers, anybody in the government, when they leave the government, have to, have this long quiet period where they're not allowed to do anything. When they enter the government, they have to give everything up. His Treasury Secretary, his Secretary of State, they have to often have to sell everything they have. And what does he do? He prints a cryptocurrency. It's mind-boggling.
Revolutionary. Some believe that Donald Trump's return to the White House marks the transition to a new world order. Are you one of them? How would you describe the next phase of globalization in particular?
So I think to some extent he's a symptom, not a cause of a new world order. Mm-hmm. So populism has been dramatic across the advanced countries. People are just not happy with the status quo. And I think, recently in most countries, the left has been in charge. The UK is an exception, the United Kingdom. And they're throwing them out. They want to see something different. I don't know if they're going to be happy, but he's partly a symptom of that. But also, Xi and Putin, the mullahs in Iran, these are really want to change the world. I mean, we are in a great power game. We are not in, this global peace. So this is a very big problem. And I want to say, I'm not so sure how it ends. My colleague, Graham Allison, he's a political scientist, has written a lot about this. China's the rising power, and the US doesn't want to give an inch. The more China grows, the more difficult the US becomes to negotiate with. And I could go into detail. So it's a very tricky period. It's especially between the US and China. Russia's, in some sense, a puppet of China at the moment and what it's doing.
Should we close with Greece? In your opinion, how sustainable is the recovery of the Greek economy from the crisis?
Well, I mean, Greece is the best performing economy in Europe, and I wouldn't sneeze at that. It's encouraging. Obviously, some of it is you're coming from a low base. Some of that is you're getting these funds from Europe that don't go on forever. But nevertheless, let's be very happy that there's a period of probably above average growth, and inflation's a little high, but coming down. So what is, I think, clearly the biggest problem in Greece still has to be improving governance, improving institutions. I've done research on what we call the underground economy, basically that doesn't pay taxes. And I've looked at comparisons across Europe, particularly looking at value-added taxes collected and how much they should have collected. And Greece is still an outlier. And it's very hard to run a government, to have good legal system, good anything, when you're not collecting taxes. I'm not telling you anything, but I think that there's still a lot of homework to do there.
You were the chief economist of the IMF, if I'm not mistaken, around the time that Greece joined the Eurozone. Would you say that a decade later, the IMF had more achievements than mistakes as far as the management of the Greek crisis is concerned, or not?
You're giving me a very tough question, but there was one big mistake that the IMF had been making for a long time and still does. When I was chief economist, we had different countries in trouble: Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, to name a few, Turkey. I argued a lot internally and later externally after I left that the IMF should force write-downs on the creditors before it comes in. And the IMF has certain language, they'll only lend into a sustainable situation. Once you bail the creditors out, they don't have much, incentive to change anything. And once you bring the official money in, it's at a lower interest rate, but it's very hard to restructure. So I think the IMF also decided that later, and look at the official papers. I mean, eventually there were write-downs in Greece, but it was after a lot of the money had been bailed out. I mean, obviously you want to give aid to Greece when it's in trouble, but you want the money to go to Greece. You don't want the money to go to the banks that lend to Greece. This happened again in Argentina not long ago. That's a situation we're sitting in. It's not just the IMF, it's the leader. If you're the head of the Greek government, the Argentine government, you don't want to default because then you're going to get kicked out. You're going to lose power. There's going to be a crisis. But I think it's the IMF's job right at that point to be, okay, no, the lenders have to write down money. Yes, it causes some chaos, but you get a faster turnaround if that happens. And Greece obviously had a very long, painful turnaround.
Thank you, Mr. Rogoff.
Thank you very much.